All right, we are live and recording. So, hope you guys are having a great day. Hopefully, I don't sound too stuffy or sniffly during this episode. Have had a cold for the past couple of days. Luckily, it is getting a lot better though. A couple of days ago, head was really pounding, just a lot of congestion and really sore throat. Did not feel good. I feel great now, other than nose running and sneezing a lot, but that's about it. So hopefully we'll be able to get through this whole episode without any of that going on. But a couple of weeks ago, I recorded an episode talking about calories and the importance of calories and how calories are, if you were to like really rank the most important variables when it comes to changing your body composition, changing your health, losing body fat, calories would be number one. And I think that's a really important conversation to have, because a lot of people just miss the mark with calories and they think there's like really special foods they need to be eating, or really special foods that inherently cause fat gain or don't cause fat gain. And they think there's these magic foods that they can just start implementing in their diet, and regardless of like what their calorie intake is like, they think they're going to start seeing fat loss. And that a lot of times sets people up for failure and sets people up to be disappointed, because they will be eating a certain amount of of these like foods that they think are going to cause more fat loss, but they end up still eating too many calories for their goal, and then they don't see results, but they're making these food choice changes, which is difficult, right? It takes discipline, but they're not seeing the results that they want, and they're feel frustrated and feel like, oh, I have no idea why this isn't working. So it's important to have that conversation that calories are the most important variable. And if you have no idea how many calories you're eating, then you're really missing a huge component when it comes to fat loss, or even just like having high energy throughout the day and changing your body composition. Maybe it's to just increase muscle tone, or maybe even gain weight. You know, you want to gain weight in certain areas, your thighs, your quads, your glutes. You want to grow those areas. Calories are super important there. But I think sometimes when we overemphasize calories, we can fall into the trap of thinking that quote unquote food quality, or if you're eating quote unquote clean or quote unquote junk food, those are terms that a lot of people can recognize and understand what I'm talking about here. We kind of miss that mark and think that those things don't matter. So in this episode, this video, I'm going to go over 6 different main reasons why or how your food quality. So are you eating processed foods, or are you eating minimally processed foods? I'm going to go over 6 reasons why that variable matters, why the level of processing of your food, or if you're eating quote unquote junk food all the time, or quote unquote healthy food all the time, but still hitting your calorie mark, why these variables do matter. So 6 main reasons, but then also I'm going to dive into, a few others that are kind of like minor reasons too, but are still included in here. So even you're going to get probably like 6, 7, 8, maybe even 9 or 10 reasons why food quality can affect your results when it comes to fat loss and changing your body composition. So while calories are most important, they're not the only thing that matters. So we're going to dive into this now. So number 1, and first let me just kind of like rephrase this again. When I talk about food quality, and you're going to hear me talk about ultra processed foods or minimally processed foods, I want you to understand what I mean by this. So food quality, when I say this in this podcast, what I mean by that is, are you eating a lot of foods that are really highly processed, that aren't in its most natural form or close to its most natural form that you would find just on Earth? So nearly all food has some level of processing. So you're probably never going to eat an entirely zero processed food diet. Like even when you go and buy raw chicken breast, like that's still processed in some way, right? They have to take the chicken, they have to, whatever they do to the chicken, I'm not going to go into the gruesome details, but get the meat out of the chicken. Same thing with beef, steak, and then even like vegetables and fruits and other things like that. Like those are still processed to a degree where like you're not just literally going out to a garden, picking an apple and eating it, or picking berries and eating them straight out of the garden. So even the most like healthiest foods, the most clean foods, there's some level of processing in there, and that's not always bad. Like process doesn't always mean bad. But when I talk about like foods that are on maybe one side of the food quality scale, that we maybe don't want to be in as often, I'm talking about really ultra processed foods, things that like you literally would not find in nature at all. Maybe like the high protein Quest chips, even like healthier versions of certain foods. I'm also talking about things like, Chips Ahoy cookies, candy bars, donuts, regular potato chips, those types of things where they are very highly processed. You wouldn't be able to just find anything similar out in the wild or out on the earth, of these items. And you also look at the actual nutrient profile of these items, and a lot of them are really high in fat and really high in sugar. That's a really common characteristic of these ultra processed foods, is they tend to be really high in fat and really high in sugar. So they really hit all of the dopamine centers in humans when we eat food, and also the high fat content makes them really easy to chew for the most part. So it's really easy to overconsume because it takes less energy to actually like physically eat them. But just wanted to kind of distinguish the difference of what I mean when I say like food quality, is I'm kind of mostly talking about, foods that in this podcast, at least, that I'm terming as low food quality foods. Those would be foods that are just really highly processed, and then foods that are maybe higher quality foods are foods that are less processed, minimally processed. So think of your quote unquote junk food, what some people would say, or think of your quote unquote healthy food, or what some people would say. Also, another way you can think about this is how much like how much packaging is involved from like its natural state. So just wanted to kind of go over that definition really quickly before we dive in. But number one reason why food quality, or how much of processed foods versus minimally processed foods you're eating, matters, is satiety. And satiety, if you're not sure what that word means, it's another word or name for fullness. So our fullness level can be dramatically different if we're eating super highly processed foods versus minimally processed foods. And this can happen for a couple of reasons, actually a few reasons. So number one is foods that are ultra processed tend to be more calorie dense. So they tend to not have a lot of volume for the amount of calories that you're eating. So think, for example, something like cookies. Like a small cookie might be like 150 calories, whereas if you're going to compare that to something that's not as processed, maybe like an apple, you would have to eat maybe 2 big apples to get 150 calories worth. Or think about, a small piece of chocolate. A small piece of chocolate might be 60 calories or so, whereas to get 60 calories from blueberries, you would have to eat like a huge bowl, a cup of blueberries. So when it comes to food volume, it's about how much space does it take up versus how many calories are included in there. And this isn't always the case, but most ultra processed foods, they don't have a lot of food volume in there for the amount of calories. So there's a lot of calories in a small portion of that food versus foods that are minimally processed. For the most part, they have a high volume for a lower calorie amount. And this isn't always the case, like I said. Like there are some foods that are not as processed that are calorie dense. So think of things like cashews, almonds, a small amount of cashews and a small amount of almonds. Though they are great fat sources, they are great sources of other really beneficial vitamins and minerals. They are pretty calorie dense. So this rule or kind of guideline or this characteristic doesn't fall for every single processed food and every single minimally processed food. But most of them fall into these categories where if it is processed, it's going to be really calorie rich for the small portion size that you might be eating. So that's one reason why it affects satiety, is because obviously if we can fill our stomach up more, it stretches our stomach, stretches our digestive system a little bit more, and that sends signals to our brain telling us, hey, we're starting to get full. Another reason why or how satiety can be affected by the level of processing of our foods that we're eating is how quickly these foods are digested. So ultra processed foods, because they have been broken down so much from their natural form, from their natural state, they tend to be in foods in their most simplest form. Like think about carbs coming from like whole grain bread. Those are what we would call like complex carbs, where those eventually get broken down into sugar in the body. Like all carbs eventually get broken down into some form of sugar, and that's how it gets processed. But there's different layers that need to happen, or different processes that need to happen to get that complex carbohydrate down to that sugar form when you're eating something like a whole grain. But when you're eating something like let's say a Pop-Tart or a Rice Krispie treat or just plain table sugar, that's already in its most simple sugar form. So your body doesn't have to go through as many steps to fully digest that, to prepare it for absorption from the body. So because of that, those foods that are in its most simplest form, like plain sugar versus, whole grain bread, the plain sugar is going to be digested much quicker, which means it's going to be absorbed much quicker, which means that slow or that quicker digestion time doesn't fill us up for us, or it doesn't fill us up as much, but it also doesn't keep us full for as long, right? Because if we have more food volume or more food going through our digestive system, it's going to stretch our stomach a little bit more. Our stomach is going to be stretched for a longer period of time. That's going to make us feel full for a longer period of time. But if we are digesting things very quickly, then we're not having that stretched effect as long. So we're not going to feel as full for as long. So that's one way why the like slower digestion period that usually comes from minimally processed foods, that's beneficial for satiety and fullness, which can help, along with your fat loss journey and everything. Another characteristic that helps with fullness or satiety when it comes to minimally processed foods versus ultra processed foods is the fiber content of these foods. So not always, but most of the time, minimally processed foods, carbohydrate sources of minimally processed foods are going to have more fiber than ultra processed forms. And fiber is a subcategory of carbohydrate that helps us to stay full. Also has a lot of beneficial characteristics for gut health. Also, some of the calories in fiber aren't actually digested and absorbed from the human body. So from a calorie perspective, if you're eating something that is 100 calories on the label, but it has 15 grams of fiber versus something that's 100 calories on the label and it has 1 gram of fiber, the item that has 1 gram of fiber, you're actually getting a little bit more calories out of that than something that has 15 grams of fiber, which can play a little bit of a role in fat loss, potentially, added up to a certain extent. Is it going to be super noticeable? Probably not, but it can play a subtle role. So the fiber also, while it does dictate the energy balance and the calorie balance, the most important thing with fiber is that it does help us to feel full and help us to feel fuller longer. Also has a lot of other health benefits, like I said, gut health, keeping blood sugar stabilized, all those things. But when it comes to strictly fat loss, body composition, more fiber is going to keep us fuller for a longer period of time. And minimally processed foods, carb sources that are minimally processed tend to have more fiber than ultra processed forms. And like I said, this rule doesn't apply all the time. Like there are some more highly processed forms of carbs that are purposely made to be high in fiber. So it's not always the case, but it is the case a lot of the time. So those are 3 reasons why the difference between ultra processed foods and minimally processed foods can significantly impact our hunger or satiety or how full we feel. So let's go on to kind of a second component. So we kind of covered fullness, satiety. Let's talk about energy throughout the day. So, and what I mean by energy throughout the day is just how how we feel on a day-to-day basis. Are we feeling sluggish? Are we feeling fatigued? Are we feeling mentally like sharp and mentally productive or physically productive throughout the day? Foods that tend to be ultra processed, the chips, the cookies, the cakes, all of those things tend to not have as many beneficial vitamins and minerals versus foods that are not as highly processed. So like your vitamins A, D, E, and K, your minerals, calcium, sodium, magnesium, selenium, all of those things, iron, those things tend to be more rich for the most part, not always, because there are some really fortified, vitamin and mineral fortified like cereals and things like that are actually pretty jam-packed with this stuff. But for the most part, those ultra processed foods, cookies, candies, chocolate, things like that aren't going to be as micronutrient rich as more whole foods. And that can play a role in our energy levels throughout the day, because like when our body's producing energy to help us feel mentally and physically sharp, there are so many metabolic processes that are happening in the body. And these metabolic processes are, think of them as almost like tasks that need to be completed at a construction site. So there's a construction site and, you have to put together these two bars, you have to put together this wall or whatever. I'm not a construction worker, so I'm not going to say specific things, but you have to build something, right? You're building a machine, building a house, building a building, and you have all these tasks that need to be completed. And you need the parts to complete these tasks. So you need the calories to complete these tasks, but you also need tools to be able to complete these tasks efficiently, right? If you were to tell someone, hey, go, drill these two pieces of wood together or whatever, but you didn't give them a drill and you gave them just a screwdriver and some screws, that's going to be a lot less efficient trying to get those pieces of wood together with a screwdriver and screws versus if you actually gave them a drill to do it more efficiently. So the tools that we have to put these building blocks together to produce this house or to produce energy, the tools you have available are almost like those micronutrients, those vitamins and minerals. The more we have, to a certain extent, obviously we don't want to have too high of levels of certain things where it's toxic, but the more we have to the sufficient levels, the more tools we're going to have available to produce energy, to speak, to think clearly, to feel energized to like get up and do laundry, to feel energized to go for a walk, to feel energized to go to the gym, to feel energized to do your next set in the gym after you finished, your first few sets, or maybe you get through your first 4 exercises and you have 2 more to go. And if you're eating a diet that's really highly processed and you're lacking some of these micronutrients or some of these tools to complete these processes, you might mentally and physically not feel like you can want to complete the last 2 exercises and might skip the last 2 exercises of your workout. But if you are eating a micronutrient rich diet, getting these vitamins and minerals in from these minimally processed foods, you are going to have the tools to, in the moment even, to recover a little bit better in between sets, to mentally feel sharp enough to push through to finish those last 2 sets. So these micronutrients that are usually more rich in these minimally processed foods play a big role in those like small metabolic processes and doing them efficiently in the body that we can't see. Like we can't see these things working. We don't necessarily like in the moment know, oh, like I feel energized to finish my workout today versus yesterday. Must be because I had, a micronutrient rich diet versus having, donuts and protein shakes in order to hit my calories and protein. Like we don't necessarily like realize that in the moment, but they do play a big role in how we feel on a day-to-day basis, and how like energized and focused we feel to get things done, whether it's just work related, family related, household related, or like fitness and nutrition related too, or even like thinking about meal prep. Like how many times are you exhausted and don't feel like meal prepping and you just want to lay on the couch and watch TV after a long work day? Like eating a diet that's high in micronutrients. So if you were to replace, your 3 cookies that you had for your snack after your lunch with like a banana or something, and you're getting more micronutrients and vitamins and minerals from that banana, you might come home from work and actually feel like, being on your feet in meal prepping. And it's just a subtle thing that you don't even really realize, but it can make a big impact, especially on a day-to-day basis. And also too, when I'm talking about these things, I didn't specify this in the beginning, but I'm talking about these are differences that can be made if you are eating the same amount of calories and protein. So even if you have two people, and let's say in order to achieve fat loss, they have to eat 2,000 calories per day and 120 grams of protein. I'm talking about these are differences that can come into play, even if both people are logging their food accurately and they are tracking their food and weighing and measuring things, and both of them are getting 2,000 calories and 120 grams of protein per day. And one person is doing it with a mostly whole food diet, and one person is doing it with maybe protein shakes and candy. So I just wanted to clarify that because I didn't say that in the beginning, which I wish I did. But like, these are differences that come into play, even if you are hitting those calorie and protein targets every single day on a week-to-week basis, but your food choices are just different. So let's move on to number 4 then, as far as I kind of skipped around. I kind of combined the energy and the micronutrients with the metabolic processes, kind of combined those two. But let's move on to the next point then. So another reason why the level of processing of your food can make a difference in your fat loss results or your fitness results is has to do with the thermic effect of food. So when we eat food, and let's say the food has 100 calories in it, let's say a banana has 100 calories. Your body is like, you're eating 100 calories worth of food. 100 calories of food is going into your mouth, going down your esophagus, but your body isn't necessarily getting a net gain of 100 calories from that. Because in order to actually be able to absorb 100 calories from that banana, your body has to digest that banana, right? It has to chew it. It has to swallow it. It has to actually chemically digest it through, the stomach, through the digestive system, small intestine. And then it also has to absorb those extra calories that are left over then. And the act of chewing your food, pushing it down, swallowing it, your stomach digesting it and breaking it down, that takes energy. Anything that your body does or that you do requires calories or energy from it. So eating that banana, while it has 100 calories, your body just didn't gain 100 calories from what it had before. It maybe gained 100 calories, but it maybe took 10 calories to actually break that down. It took 10 calories total to chew it, to swallow it, and to digest it. So you're only getting a net difference of plus 90 calories from eating that food. Think about if if you had this goal of you wanted to, make $1,000 from an investment, right? You can't just say, okay, I'm going to make $1,000 from an investment and I net gained $1,000. No, you have to put some money in there to invest. And then however much that stock or whatever increases, is your net gain. But if you have an account and after 1 month, your account balance is $1,000, but you put money in, the net gain isn't a total of $1,000. The net gain is the difference between what you put in to extract that 1,000 or to get the 1,000 out of that investment. Or if you were to let's say place a bet on a sports game or something like that because you wanted to win $1,000, that $100 that you put into that bet is that 10 calories that you're putting into that banana to try to extract the 100 calories out of it to have a net gain of 90 calories. So everything we eat, there's some kind of cost or energy cost to actually chewing it, swallowing it, digesting it, breaking it down so we can actually get some calories out of it. And foods that are minimally processed, they don't have as much of a thermic effect. So they don't require as many calories, or they don't require as much energy to actually break that food down for absorption. So if you were to eat something like a really highly processed brownie that, it's already in its most simple form. It's already really broken down to its most simple nutrients, and you just have to chew it. And it's also very chewy, so it's not very hard, not very crunchy, and swallow it. That might be like, you might have to put in 5 calories in order to get 100 calories out, versus something like almonds. You might have to, like, your body might have to actually use 25 calories in order to get 100 calories out of the almonds. So foods that are highly processed or ultra processed, because they tend to be softer foods, easier to chew, because they tend to be more calorie dense, because they tend to be in their most simple form, especially like when it comes to sugar, those things don't have as much of an energy cost when it comes to digesting and breaking them down. So the thermic effect isn't as high. So most of those calories that you see on that food label, you're actually getting a net gain of a lot of those calories, versus foods that are not as processed. You're not getting as many actually, because it's taking more to like break those foods down. Now, it's not a dramatic difference. Like, the thermic effect of food on average is around 10%. So if you eat 100 calories, you're probably expending, let's say on average 10% of those calories, so 10 calories in order to digest and absorb that. But if you're eating a diet that is mostly minimally processed foods, you can maybe shift that scale to maybe closer to 15% as far as the thermic effect. So, when you eat 100 calories instead of 90 calories, you might actually only be absorbing a net difference of 85 calories, versus if you're eating an ultra processed food diet. So a lot of your foods are highly processed, even though you're eating the same amount of calories and protein, your thermic effect might, instead of 10%, it might be on the low end. It might be around like 5%, and you might be actually getting 95 calories for every 100 calories you try to eat. And that could, make a difference over a span of a day, weeks, months. Every little bit can help some. So that's one reason, is the thermic effect of food. Also, another characteristic, which is kind of similar to thermic effect, but a little bit different, is the absorption level of the food that you have. So there's research studies that look at things like almonds and cashews, and while they are pretty calorie dense, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, they have not necessarily a higher thermic effect. Well, they probably do, but you also just don't absorb as many of the calories from the almonds and the cashews as you would from like 100 calories of chocolate. And that's because it has to do with not only the fiber content of some of these almonds and cashews and peanuts and things, but also because there's this like hard shell around it. There's different layers to actually break down and digest and absorb. And it's like, when food goes through your digestive tract, obviously like there's a certain pace that it goes through, so we can try to extract as much calories from it as possible, but it can't be an infinitely slow pace. So something that's able to move through, or you're able to like extract more calories from it quicker, you're going to get like absorb more of those calories, versus something that takes like multiple churnings of like the stomach acid in your stomach to break down. You're not going to be able to absorb as many. So I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. I wish I did, but something like almonds or cashews, you might eat 150 calories of those, what's labeled on the food or on the food label and what you measure out. But when you actually if you were to look at how many calories you actually extracted from that 150 calories that you ate, you might only be extracting 100 calories and might actually be missing out on 50 of those calories. And the way they measure this, I believe, is by looking at the calorie content of your poop after you eat something like that. And that has to do with just how hard it is to break down some of these minimally processed foods. Cashews, almonds with a hard shell, there's different layers to it. It takes a lot of chewing to break it down. Even thinking about like apples with the skin, like that's another layer that your body is trying to break down, as it's passing through your digestive system. And sometimes like those things just don't get fully broken down by the time they actually pass through. So like when you're eating a super highly processed food diet, a lot of like nearly all of those calories or most of them are really going to be extracted and absorbed. Whereas if you're eating a mostly minimally processed, low processed food diet, there could be a decent amount of calories that like your body's just not absorbing as much and they're kind of passing through a little bit. Now it's not going to be extreme either. Like these are all like little minor details, but all of these can add up. Another, or also too, I wanted to give an analogy when it comes to the absorption of calories. Think about like if you were to go to the beach as a kid and you were to play in the sand with one of those, what's called like sifters. Think about like something that's ultra processed would be like putting sand through a sifter that's already been through the sifter maybe 3 or 4 times, right? The sand is very thin. The sand's already been really broken down. So when you put it through the sifter that 4th time, like all of the sand is going to go through those holes. And that, like when you look at the top of the sifter, there's not going to be any little like big pieces of sand or big pieces of rock that are left over. And then those foods that are minimally processed or not as processed, those haven't been through that premature sifter all those times. And that would be like the first time you put the sand through that sifter where you look and, oh, like there's a bunch of big pieces of clumps of sand that were left over, or there were bigger pieces of rock that were left over. It's kind of an analogy as far as a way to think about how easily some of these highly processed foods are absorbed versus how it's a little bit harder to absorb all of the calories from these minimally processed foods because they just haven't been broken down as many times or as much before you actually put them through that digestive system. So hopefully that kind of helped to paint the picture with that. Another point when it comes to ultra processed versus minimally processed foods are the accuracy of your calorie tracking. So this is one that a lot of people don't really know, which is food labeling can be about 20% off. So if you look at a food label and it says a food item in this serving amount is 100 calories, it actually could be anywhere from 80 calories to 120 calories. Like they're able to round up to 20%. Or up or down 20%. And most companies, I'm assuming, are probably going to round down just because then it makes their food more appealing if you're like, oh, like this amount was only 100 calories, you know. So, but they're able to round up or down about 20%. So how, like why this matters is that like unprocessed foods, when they have a food label on them, they're able to round up or down too. But it kind of comes back to the food volume part of this, where when your food volume is very high, meaning a big portion of the food is a small amount of calories, versus your food volume being low, where a small portion of the food is a high amount of calories, that 20% difference that could be coming into play on the food label doesn't make as much of a difference in how many calories you're actually eating and tracking when you're eating mostly high volume foods. Because if you're weighing and tracking your food, you're basing it off of weight, right? So 100 grams of this food is 100 calories versus this other food, let's say 100 grams of it is 300 calories, right? That would be the difference between a low volume food versus a high volume food. So low volume food, 100 grams of it is 100 calories. A high volume food, 100 grams of it is 300 calories, so 3 times the amount of calories. So let's say if there's a 20% difference in how many calories are actually in 100 grams of that food from the food label, if that 20% difference is there with that higher volume food and you're weighing out 100 grams, you might be eating 20 extra calories than what you think. But if you're weighing out 100 grams of that calorie dense food, that could be about a 60 calorie difference in the amount of calories you're actually eating because of that 20%, and you're actually eating 300 calories worth because you're having the same weight and volume, but the calorie density of it is different. So like when it comes to tracking your food, the more high volume or minimally processed foods you can eat helps to minimize the difference in that 20% kind of deviation that they're able to have, it minimizes how much of an impact that can make on the actual calories you're eating. So that's another thing. And like an example of this too is like, even if you don't even think about the 20% difference on the food label, let's say if you were 20% off in how accurate you were with tracking, let's say you were trying to eyeball everything. If you were to eyeball spinach and try to track that in MyFitnessPal versus if you were eyeballing something like M&Ms and saying, okay, this is about a half a cup of M&Ms and this is this many calories. If you eyeball the spinach and accidentally eat 3 times the amount of spinach of what you're logging, like let's say you're logging a half a cup of spinach, but you're actually eating 1.5 cups, because spinach is so low calorie density, and there's about, I think, 7 calories in 3 cups of spinach. If you were to eat a cup and a half of spinach, that would be 3.5 calories, versus if you were actually trying to eat a half a cup of spinach, that would be 1 calorie of spinach you would eat. So you would be eating the difference between, you think you ate 1 calorie of spinach, but you actually ended up eating 3.5 calories of spinach. Versus with M&Ms, if you were to look at this and try to eat half a cup of M&Ms, but you actually ended up eating a cup and a half, that half a cup of M&Ms might be like 120 calories. So instead of 120 calories, you're eating 360 calories, which is a 240 calorie difference. So by accidentally tripling your portion size on something like spinach, that is a low calorie density food, it's only a 2 calorie difference, which is literally pretty much zero, versus something that has a high calorie density and you're estimating by eyeballing it and accidentally eating 3 times the amount that you think. You could be eating 240 calories more than what you think, which is a huge difference, which can greatly impact your results. So the lower the processing of foods you eat, and this is kind of like a chain reaction here almost, but the lower the processing of the food that you eat, the higher volume of food, or the lower the calorie density is probably going to be, which means if the food label is a little bit off, like 20%, or if your food tracking is a little bit off, it's not going to impact your results as far as how many calories you're actually eating as much. So that's another way it can impact your results. Other factors to consider too when it comes to ultra processed foods versus low processed foods are your mood. So our mood is really greatly impacted by our energy levels. Kind of goes back to the whole micronutrient piece that I talked about, getting plenty of vitamins and minerals. But like there's some little bit of research behind like the amounts of certain vitamins and minerals we eat. Like if we are being deficient in some of these, then we have a greater likelihood to maybe deal with symptoms of depression or anxiety or this or that. And like some of this research is premature. A lot of it is more correlational, not necessarily causational, but there is some hint or clues to maybe these things playing a role. So the more micronutrients you get from eating more minimally processed foods, the better off your mood is probably going to feel. And also too, even if there's not a direct causation between these things, the more micronutrient dense your food is, the more vitamins and minerals you're getting from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean meats, things like that, the more productive you're going to feel, the higher energy you're going to feel throughout the day, the more things you're probably going to be able to get done. You're probably going to be more productive with work. You're probably going to be more productive at home with yard work, doing things around the house. You're probably going to have more energy to like get up off the couch and go play with your kids, which can be psychologically fulfilling, right? Like you feel good when you're able to get up and be active with your kids, do things with them, play with them, and create good experiences and memories with them. Like all these things help you to overall have a better mood and feel good. I think I saw this quote or stat or something that like the 3 most important things for overall health are like fitness and nutrition, having a purpose of life, and good community and good relationships. So if you feel energized to like obviously do the fitness and nutrition side of things, but if you are getting enough vitamins and minerals, those micronutrients, to have high energy throughout the day, to feel mentally sharp, to feel like feel that push to want to like go meet with a friend instead of just lay on the couch and watch Netflix, you're probably going to feel more fulfilled in your life. If you have that energy to be more productive at work and to maybe like take the extra step to get that promotion or do something, maybe it's not even work related, but do something else to like have a higher purpose in life, that's going to help you to feel more fulfilled too. It's going to improve your mood, decrease the likelihood of things like depression, anxiety, and all that stuff. So it's all like so connected there. Another thing that can be affected by how highly processed or minimally processed the foods you're eating are your gym performance. Like if you are hitting your calories and protein, but you're doing them from a bunch of protein shakes and candy, you're probably not going to feel good going into the gym. You're going to feel sluggish. You're probably not going to feel energized for your workouts. You're probably going to, like, your stomach's not going to feel great. You're going to be burping up a lot of food. Like, one thing that can really help you to, like, eat healthy throughout the day or eat, minimally processed foods throughout the day is if you do have a later workout planned. Like, if I typically work out, for the most part, in the mornings-ish, usually it's around, like, 10 a.m., after I drop my son off from daycare or off at daycare. But if I have a workout that I have to do at like 4 p.m., I am really conscious about what I eat for lunch that day because I don't want to eat a really greasy burger or greasy French fries or a bunch of cookies or things like that, knowing that I'm going to have to go squat heavyweight or deadlift heavyweight or even bench press or do whatever, or do a heavy lifting session or push myself in the gym just a few hours after that. Because I know eating that greasy food, the hamburgers, the French fries, all that, I know that it makes me feel sluggish. It doesn't make me feel physically energized. If you were to ask somebody to go try to, run a mile after eating a large pizza, like, you're going to feel uncomfortable and you're going to feel like you're going to throw up probably. And your performance is not going to be great, even if you are able to push through it without throwing up. So if your food or your diet is all, highly processed foods, you aren't going to feel as capable to actually push through hard workouts and get them done. And if you're not pushing through hard workouts, you're not getting them done. Maybe you're skipping them more often because you don't feel as good. You had a really heavy lunch that's just kind of sitting in your stomach, and you're like, I'm supposed to work out at 4. I'll just push this tomorrow because I just don't feel good and I feel like I'm going to throw up. Like, those things happen more often when a lot of your foods are these highly processed foods. But if you're eating a mostly whole food diet, then you're going to feel like that food's going to digest better. It's not going to just sit so heavily in your stomach. And you're going to feel more energized and feel better to actually get those workouts in and push yourselves without feeling so physically uncomfortable and having that stomach discomfort. So that's another big one too. Also, a couple of other ones: sleep quality. If you're eating a meal, especially late at night, that is very highly processed, really heavy, really high in fat, especially saturated fat, greasy fats, those types of meals, if you were to eat like a Big Mac from McDonald's and a large fry and then try to go to bed in just a couple of hours, you're probably not going to get as good a quality of sleep because a lot of that food is still going to be digesting in your stomach. It's going to be very heavy in there. Eating a really high fat meal can cause more reflux, especially as you like lay down and try to fall asleep. But if you're eating a diet that's not as processed, it's probably not going to be as high in those heavy saturated fats. And you're probably going to feel more comfortable laying down and going to sleep after that as well. So another thing to consider there too. And then kind of the last one is just overall gut health, your digestion. If you're having problems with feeling like you have very loose stools all the time, maybe diarrhea constantly, or maybe you're not having bowel movements as frequently as you should because your fiber intake is so low because you're eating such a high processed diet and you're only going to the bathroom once every 2 or 3 days versus regularly maybe once every day. That can play a role too in your result, or not in your results, but just how you feel on a daily basis and also your overall health. So those are kind of all of the ways that the level of processing of the food that you're eating can like really impact how you feel and how your body functions and how your mind functions, which can impact how you show up in your fitness journey, but also some little things in there, some little nuggets in there of like the level of processing of your food can also impact like directly the energy balance equation of things of, how many of those calories are you actually extracting and absorbing? How much work or what's the thermic effect of those calories or the foods you're trying to eat? Is your thermic effect higher, so you're actually having to burn more calories to digest and absorb those foods, or is your thermic effect lower where you're not having to? So hopefully this all helped to paint the picture that like food quality or the level of processing of your food does matter both directly in your fitness and health journey, but also indirectly in your fitness and health journey. So key takeaways from this, and I'll kind of wrap this up, are the calories and protein are what matters the most. Do not miss sight of that, or don't like miss the forest for the trees, right? That's something I just really want to emphasize and hit home, that the calorie and protein content total of the foods that you're eating, those make the biggest impact. It's like, like I kind of mentioned the construction example. It's like having this goal of building this house. First, you need the materials. You need the calories and protein to build that house. And you need the workers. You can include the workers in this category of like the materials that you need. But in order to do it most efficiently, you also need the tools, which the tools are the micronutrients, the good quality foods, the systems in place to help build that house most efficiently, which, can be, analogous to eating good quality foods that help us to feel full, that help us to achieve that calorie and protein content that we want easier, without as much physical and mental stress, without feeling as hungry through the process and all that. So should you cut out processed foods completely? Absolutely not. And like I mentioned, a lot of these rules with processed foods that I mentioned in this video, they don't apply to every processed food. Like there are some highly processed foods that are actually like really great for fat loss and fitness and the weight loss journey, and all that. So you don't have to cut them out completely. And there is a component to food where we shouldn't just eat food 100% of the time based on like, what is it doing for our physiology? What is it doing for our fat loss? What is it doing for our fitness? Like sometimes we eat food because psychologically we want to celebrate something, or psychologically we just really like the taste of ice cream and we just want to eat ice cream one day with our kids and make those memories. So there's a social, emotional component, psychological component to food that shouldn't be ignored and shouldn't be pushed to the wayside. But that shouldn't be the bulk of the food that we eat. A big portion, and I always, tell clients, try to make 80 to 85% of your diet be more whole foods, more minimally processed foods, common sense foods that you would look at if you were to like see a picture of a food and you were to put in your head, okay, is this healthy or not healthy, that you would check off on the healthy list. So don't overthink these things, but have 80 to 85% of your diet coming from foods like that. And on a calorie level, 80 to 85% of your diet would be, if you're eating 2,000 calories a day, that would be about 1,600 to maybe 1,700 of your calories coming from whole, minimally processed foods, which gives you around 300, maybe 350 calories to play around with having, some cookies throughout the day, or maybe having a donut, or having like a little bit of a sweet treat or something like that here and there. Like it gives you that flexibility to include those things a little bit on a day-to-day basis, but the bulk of your calories, the bulk of your foods are still coming from very micronutrient dense sources, more minimally processed food sources, and that's going to set you up for the most amount of success. And sure, do we have days where sometimes we don't quite hit that 80 to 85% and maybe it looks like 50% of our diet is coming from processed food? Absolutely. Like I have days like that, whether it's some kind of celebration or we're on a road trip, traveling a lot, stopping at gas stations a lot. And even if I still hit my calories and protein on those days, like a lot of times it's from more protein shakes and more processed carb options. Like those things happen sometimes. And like I said, if it's a day here and there, it's not going to make a dramatic difference. But if on a day-to-day basis, like you're constantly hitting your calories and protein from just protein shakes and processed carb sources, and you're feeling like crap, your energy is low, you're not feeling motivated from your workouts, you're not seeing quite the results you think you should be seeing, you're hungry all the time, try shifting more of your foods to whole, minimally processed foods, and I guarantee these things are going to improve. So hopefully this was really informative and helpful. Appreciate you all. I'll see you in the next one. And yeah, that's it. So see you guys later.